In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna is instructing Arjuna on what should be done or what are the characteristics of a Sthita Prajna. That he is telling in response to the question by Arjuna, how a Sthita Prajna is, how to identify a Sthita Prajna, and what are the characteristics or what is the conduct of a Sthita Prajna or a person who is established in Samadhi. That means one who has completely controlled one's mind. Now these characteristics are the features or the identifying traits of a person who has controlled one's mind or one who has got realization of the self or Brahman or God. But they are also spiritual practices for an aspirant or a sadhaka. They are also things to do by a person who wants to realize God or wants to control the mind. So while they are the features of a person who has attained the destination, they also constitute the path for a person who wants to attain that destination. In spiritual life, we see that everything is dependent on the mind. It is the mind which is the cause of ignorance, and it is the mind which is the effect of ignorance also. Because of ignorance, the primal ignorance called Mula Vidya or Karana Sharira, one has this mind. Mind comes into being because one has the primal ignorance about one's own true self. One thinks that this manifestation is the true reality. So that is one reason. And because the mind is there, mind cannot survive without desires, and desires cannot survive without thoughts. So mind produces numerous, countless thoughts, pulling a person from one direction to the another. So again, mind is the cause of further delusion caused by ignorance. And this mind is the seat of all kinds of fetters, all kinds of bandha, or also called as enemies, which are called Shadripus, 6 enemies: anger, jealousy, etc., etc., greed, and all other lust, etc. So, again, mind is the place where a spiritual aspirant has to work on these impurities of mind. So, using the mind, one has to get rid of the mind. Using the ladder, one has to go to the terrace, to paraphrase Sri Ramakrishna's example, and after going there, it is not necessary that you have the ladder, because then you understand that everything is made up of the same reality, or only the same reality exists. Because of this importance of mind, all spiritual practices emphasize control of mind, which is the sixth sense organ, and all spiritual disciplines or religious traditions emphasize that it is mind alone which has to be disciplined or which has to be controlled. And that is why in the Amrita Bindu Upanishad it has been told, Manaeva Manushyanam Karanam Bandha Mokshayoho, that mind alone is the reason of bondage and liberation of human beings. So, if that is the case, then one has to understand how this mind functions. What is the psychology of the mind? What is the basic characteristic of the mind? How it works, or why is it that it does what it does? And so, in a very masterly fashion, in a wonderful way, Sri Krishna tells this in just 4 lines in the Bhagavad Gita, which unfortunately has not been studied in depth as it should have been. So, this to my mind is the psychology of the mind presented to us by Sri Krishna in just 4 lines, in 2 shlokas, 62nd and the 63rd shloka of the second chapter. here he talks about what happens in the mind and to what results it leads one to. So this is how the shloka is. Dhyayato vishayan pumsah sangah teshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamah kamat krodho abhijayate krodhat bhavati sammohah sammohat smriti vibramah smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. I've read both the shlokas together, 4 lines. Now these 4 lines we have to understand in detail how they work. So first he says Vishayan dhyayatah pumsah. That means Vishayan means sense objects, objects that are related to each of our sense organ. For example, if you have eyes which see, there should be something which has to be seen. There should be some form. Then ear, which is used to hear, so there should be something, some sound or something which one has to hear. Similarly for touch, taste and smell. Touch, taste and smell and sight and hearing. So all sound. So all these senses are dependent on some sense objects. So if you don't see these sense objects, or if you don't use these senses to see the sense objects, practically these senses will not disturb you, but they do disturb you because of the memory of what they have already seen. So you might not see something fresh by your eyes, but what you have already seen using your eyes, that smriti, that memory, that disturbs you. So that is why one has to be very careful in restraining one's sense organs. Means one has to control one's sense organs, but that is not sufficient. One has to also control the mind. So here Sri Krishna says Vishayan, that means sense objects, objects which are related to, connected to any of the sense organs. Dhyayatah, thinking, pumsah, a person. So a person thinks of sense objects. A person thinks of sense objects. So that could be when one's senses come in touch with a sense object, or it could be based on memory. So you might see something and think of a sense object, or it could be that you have seen something in the past and suddenly that impression, that tendency which was there in your mind has been kindled, it has been awakened, and you remember that particular thing. So dhyayatah vishayan pumsah. Pumsah, human beings, they think about a particular sense object. So suppose there is something, say there is, what is the food you like most? Really? Yeah. So there is, suppose there is this Bismillah. So Bismillah you have either you have seen it or eaten it in the past, or you just see it in front of you. Even the smell. So the smell, you have the smell. So when you get this, or maybe because of your past experiences of Bismillah, you suddenly remember, oh, Bismillah. So that idea of this particular dish comes into your mind. Then what happens? You start thinking about that particular dish. It could be either because you saw it, or you smelled it, or somebody told you, hearing that Bismillah yesterday I had in such and such place, or today I am going to cook, etc. Or you just remembered it. In either way, whatever the reason might have been, you now suddenly start thinking about this Bismillah. This is a sense object. So sense object you have started thinking about. Then what happens? The more you think about it, or even if you think about it a little, what happens? Sangah upajayate. Teshu sangah upajayate. In it, in that particular sense object, teshu means in them. So a person thinks about so many sense objects, so many objects connected with our sense organs, and while thinking of those sense objects, in that particular sense object, what is developed? Sangaha, attachment is developed. So you think about this Bismillah bath, either seeing it or smelling it or hearing about it by somebody, from somebody, then what happens? Then your tongue starts salivating. You're thinking about it. Now, just thinking should not be a problem, but you are also getting attached to it. And that's why your tongue starts salivating. You think that now I will get Bisivalabhati, or whatever sense objects you are thinking about. So once that sangaha upajayate, now there is a strong attachment which is produced because of your thinking of a particular sense object. And then now, because of this strong attachment, what happens? In you there is a need which is generated, that I now want this. At that particular point in time, it appears as though without that particular sense object, in our example, Bisivalabad, the whole world is insipid. This universe has no meaning. Everything is without meaning. Without Bisivalabad, what is the use of living, etc. And it is not a joke. Actually, people start thinking like that. And so, what you start thinking that because without this particular sense experience, without this particular food or this particular sense object, my entire life is worthless. What is the use if I have earned so much money and I have, some station in life, I have some reputation in society, if I cannot have a plate of Bisivalabad? So that is how you are directed just by thinking about that particular sense object. Then what happens? Kamaha sanjaya, sangat kamaha sanjayate. Because of that attachment which is generated, now this kamaha or longing or desire is again born. So first there was just thinking, then because of thinking, what happened? Attachment was generated, and from attachment, what happens? Desire is born. So a lot of desire comes that no, I have to now get this. I have to, come what may, attain this particular sense object. In our example, Bisivalabhati. So I have to get this. Kamat krodha abhijayate. Now most of the times we are unable to get what we desire. So Swamiji says anger is crystallized lust. So when you have desire or lusting for a sense object, lust does not mean just a bodily lust, but sense object, of course, they are also part of the body. So when you are not getting it, there is some obstruction, there is some hindrance. Somehow you are not getting the sense object which you have started craving now. And from where did this craving arise? Just by thinking. You thought. There was a person who was very intelligent, and he was asked, what are the different tenses of the word think? So he said, I thinked. Like that. So you think, or you thought, and you kept on thinking, and finally what happened? Attachment was generated. And when attachment was generated, then what happened? Then because of that, desire was generated. And when desire has been generated, then you become the whole idea about the sense object is the only thing which is now propelling you, which is governing you. Day and night, in sleep and dream, in every waking state, you are thinking only about that particular sense object. And it happens. This is what happens. So you are thinking how to get that. And people use this word by hook or crook, by a righteous method or an unrighteous method, how to obtain that particular sense object. When you have become so passionately obsessed with that desire, then if for a particular reason you are unable to fulfill that desire, then what happens? Where will this obsession go? This obsession, mind has become completely obsessed over a particular sense object, and that fulfillment is not coming. So where will that obsession go? This obsession gets transformed, converted into anger. This obsession gets converted into anger. But the beauty is, this obsession was not there. All of this has been created out of memory or a thinking, thought. just a thought. It's just a thought. Nothing has happened in reality. Nothing has happened. So that is why some people say that, oh, I could have, got a lottery ticket. So there is this famous story of how a person was sleeping and he had a pot of what is that called, paddy, and then he thought that I will go and sell this paddy in the market, and then I will get money, then I will further sell, then I will eventually become a big merchant, then I will marry, then etc. No, he already married, so I will do this, etc. I will marry, then I will have children, then there will be 2 children, 3 children, then I will be lying down in a big mansion on a golden cot or something like that, and these children will come and lie on me, and then I will kick, they will kicking me, then I will kick them and say, hey, allow me to sleep, and then I will give them a big kick, and he gave a big kick and the pot got broken. So that's the end of the story. But there was nothing of that happened. So he just imagining that I could have become this, and then finally that person starts crying, oh, all this mansion, everything went away. But there was no mansion, nothing. All he had was a pot of paddy. So, similarly, most of the times the things we cry that we have lost are all imaginary. There was nothing. So, it's all your thinking that if it would have been like this, then it would have been like that, and then it would have been like that, and so on and so forth. And finally you say, oh, but for this particular thing, I did not become the President of the United States of America. Otherwise, everything was ready. So this kind of a thought is what creates problem. So here, because of thought of a sense object, you get attached, and because of attachment, a longing or a craving or desire is created. And when the desire is created, you become obsessed with the desire, and because of that, what comes? If that desire is not fulfilled, then anger comes. And from anger, krodhat bhavati sammoha. So by anger, from anger comes delusion. So what kind of delusion comes here? See, delusion comes by confusion. Confusion, that you forget whatever you have learned. All your wisdom is gone. It just goes away. It just goes away. It just vanishes. Poof, it vanishes. That's all. Everything is gone. Everything gone to dust. What you have learned, etc. So you might have learned that you should respect the elders. You should behave in a particular manner. But when you are angry, everything goes in the wind. You just forget everything, and you don't respect your elders, you don't show any love and affection, nothing. All you need or all you want now is the object for which you have so completely obsessed. You are so completely obsessed, that is the object you want now, that is the only thing which you want. And so that is why sammoha. Sammoha means delusion. Sammohat smriti vibhrama. Smriti vibhrama means loss of memory. By this confusion or delusion, what happens? You completely lose your memory. What is right, what is wrong, what is proper, what is improper. All sense of propriety you lose. All sense of righteousness you lose. All ideas of moral behavior or rational behavior you lose. So you start talking irrationally. You start behaving immorally. You completely lose your sense of discrimination or discernment. What is right, what is wrong, where I should go, etc. Everything you lose. It is not that you have not understood it. It is not that you have not studied it. You have studied it. But now your mind is so obsessed with a particular sense object that because it has not got that particular sense object, you forget everything. That is why it is told that at the correct moment, the right thought will come to your mind only when you are pure. Pure meaning when you have no desires. Else, people who are so well versed in a particular subject, or who have so much of worldly wisdom, what to do. They give advice to everybody. But when it comes to their own matters, they are unable to take decision. Why? Because they have desires. Because they have desires. And because of desires, these things happen, this cycle takes place, and smriti vibhramaha happens. You lose memory. You forget what to do. So you say, oh, at that particular time I could not remember that this is what I have to do. Why? Because you have attachment or desire. And smriti bhramshat buddhi nasho. By the loss of memory, you lose buddhi or discrimination, the right to the ability to reason, the ability to act rationally. You lose buddhi nashat, and if you lose that, pranashyati, you perish. So all it takes is just one thought to destroy you. It does not take a virus, it just takes one thought. So if you think something, then if you keep on thinking about that, then you get attached. And when you get attached, when you don't achieve, or when you are not able to give that thought a particular realization or experience, then you get angry. By getting angry, you get confused. By getting confused, you forget whatever you have learnt. By forgetting whatever you have learnt, you are destroyed. You lose the power of discriminating and you are destroyed. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is in the 2nd chapter that Sri Krishna started speaking. Before that, he has not spoken. And in the 2nd chapter itself, he has talked about what are the characteristics of a person of steady wisdom or sthita prajna. And immediately he tells about the whole psychology of the mind. And later on we will see he also tells about how to control the mind so that it does not behave in this manner. So by understanding and the beginning itself, Sri Krishna talks about the Atman, the nature of Atman, what are the properties of Atman, etc. Properties in the sense, what are the characteristics of Atman, etc. You cannot define the characteristics or properties of Atman just like we define the properties of a chemical, but he has tried to give an idea about Atman or Brahman. So in the very first chapter where he starts speaking, he tells these. So it shows how important these things are in a spiritual life or for any life for that matter. That's why we have to understand that we have to practice equanimity of mind. We have to practice the idea that we are the Atman, not the body and the mind. And we have to understand how the mind plays tricks. How the mind plays tricks. So now the question is, okay, understood. This is the psychology of the mind. That in 4 lines you have shown us how the mind gets destroyed and leads to destruction of the person itself. But how to get rid of this? So in the 64th shloka he says, Raga dvesha viyuktaistu vishayan indriyaischcharan atmavashyaihi vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. So so this is the condition of a person who is obsessed with a particular sense object or the thought of a particular sense object. But raga dvesha viyuktaihi. Viyuktaihi means a person who is free. Yuktai means one who is attached. But viyuktai means one person who is free from raga, attraction or attachment, and aversion, dvesha. A person who is free from both raga and dvesha, attraction and aversion, and atma vashyahi is vashyahi, restrained, atma, self. So self-restrained, indriyahi, with senses, vishayan, sense objects, charan, amongst moving, vidheyatma, the self-controlled, prasadam, peace or tranquility, adhigacchati, he attains. So Arjuna also asked a question, how does a person conduct oneself? How does a sthita prajna, a person of steady wisdom, conduct oneself? So here Sri Krishna is giving the answer. He says, that a person who has controlled one's senses, Atma Vashyaihi, one who has controlled oneself, Indriyaihi, and he is moving among objects, sense objects. So a person who has controlled one's mind and senses is also dealing with sense objects. But his sense objects are dealt with senses which are controlled. Indrehi. So he has got controlled senses and he is free from raga and dvesha, attraction or attachment and aversion. And that person attains to prasadam, peace or tranquility. That means a person who has controlled oneself also deals with sense objects, also sees things, hears things, touches things, tastes things, smells things. But that person is having senses which are controlled. And so, though that person is dealing with sense objects, is not disturbed by sense objects because that person is not attached or is not averse to any particular sense object. So this is very important. So how to get rid of this control of our mind? By not getting attached to anything and also not getting averse to anything. Actually, attachment and aversion are the obverse and reverse of the same coin. They are the two sides of the same coin. So if you don't like anything, that is also attachment. Don't liking is also liking. Not liking is also liking. So if you don't like anything also is attachment, and if you like something is also attachment. So you should not like something, you should also not hate something. And then your senses should be under control, your mind should be under control, then you will always be peaceful. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.